Hi, my name is Jordan. I am a special education teacher from the UK. I share my passion for everything communication, sensory regulation, and fun lesson ideas for my classroom of disabled pupils aged 4 to 11. Each week, I am joined by experts in the field, answering your questions and sharing our knowledge and experience working alongside our beautiful young people. Let's get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Sensory Classroom podcast. Today, I'm joined by Natalia, Speech Esteem on social media. Hello, Natalia. Hello. So you're a speech and language therapist based in London, is that right?
That's right, yes.
And you work with autistic children, working with AAC, gestalt language processing, minimally speaking children, non-speaking, that kind of thing?
All of that. And sometimes I also work with children who have developmental language disorder, children who are selectively mute. And yes, like you said, predominantly autistic children who are non-speaking, but also autistic children who are verbal and speak. Yeah.
Is select mutism sometimes linked with autism? Only because in my experience it has been.
Yeah, it can be for sure. Yeah. There's really quite a big link between selective mutism and autism, but also selective mutism is linked very strongly to social anxiety as well. And sometimes there's a really beneficial link between speech therapists and psychologists. And it can make a huge impact on a child's life when that kind of little MDT is formed around a child who's selectively mute.
I've seen that actually. I've seen that with my very anxious learners. They build a really strong bond with the speech and language therapist more than anyone else. And I feel like however much we try to build that connection, I feel like speech and language therapists are so great and trained at building connections, listening, hearing what's being said or communicated, and really boosting that their self-esteem and building that strong relationship that way is a really wonderful thing to witness as a teacher, is these really strong bonds with therapists that visit my room with some students that on the outset seem quite hard to reach, but speech therapists seem to do it.
You said it so beautifully. And I think it's nice to hear because sometimes when I'm in the classroom, I do work on that connection and the relationship, but I don't realize that other people are watching. So that's so nice to hear.
I suppose if you're not based in a school, it's hard to see what they're like without you there.
Yeah, yeah.
I remember with a pupil, I think I worked with them about 10 years ago, but it just brings to mind, he was very hesitant to be in the classroom. He was beautiful, beautiful, but she found the classroom really, really overwhelming and found transitions very difficult. A very anxious gestalt language processor I know now, but I didn't know that then. I knew he was autistic, gorgeous boy. And the only time I saw his eyes light up, like physically and emotionally just lit up, was when he was doing and working with the speech and language therapist. And it showed me that it was possible that we could make him feel comfortable in the space and that he would come into the space and he would engage and join, and we could see what he was capable of because he built such a trusting connection. And ultimately it came down to, she'd never let him down. She'd never broken a promise. She'd never falsely said anything or pushed him to do anything that he wasn't comfortable to do. And she listened to him and was his advocate and his voice. And ultimately it was just so beautiful. And it taught everyone else to step up, basically, and to do it differently, to do it in a neuroaffirming way, which 10 years ago I didn't have that language. I didn't know that. I was still very much learning. But yeah, speech and language therapists are angels because of that. I love working. I've learned so much from working with speech and language therapists.
I love how you put it. And I feel like it's so important to create that safe relationship, like emotionally safe connection with a child before you get any communication out of them and before you even try to tap into communication opportunities with them. Because if you don't really have that connection, if the child doesn't feel emotionally safe with you, it's unlikely they'll feel comfortable sharing who they truly are. So that's such a big thing. Sounds like an amazing speech therapist that you're working with.
Yeah, but I mean, they were all amazing. Every speech and language therapist I've worked with has been fabulous. I've learned so much from them. So how would you build that connection then? What would that look like in practice? You've met a child for the first time. Do you often work in schools or do you work in a clinic or
So I worked in clinics, but now predominantly I work in schools, but I also visit families and I visit
okay.
children at home. So I'm kind of dipping my toes into all settings.
That's wonderful. You get a good mixture. Imagine
Yeah.
you're seeing a child for the first time. How do you establish that initial connection? What kind of things are you doing, saying, thinking about in order to start that positively?
Yeah, I think the really first thing that might be a little bit surprising is that I don't say anything at first, at least the first 10 to 15 minutes of interaction with a child, because I just want to see who they are, what they are interested in, are they interested in me or not really? So really kind of realizing that silence is okay at first. And there is no pressure really to talk or really to communicate with me at first. And it might look a little bit weird. It's like, we're expecting the speech therapist to come in and really get started. And I'm there just like joining in their play very gently or just being on the periphery. And I found that oftentimes it works the best when I'm this person who doesn't come in with an agenda, a person who comes in with genuine interest in whatever they're doing already and not trying to take their attention away from that thing.
Mm.
Um, and I find this first step is the best one, and it really helps me to start creating that connection. It's not the sole thing that makes us feel connected, but it's kind of like opening the door a little bit and not kicking them out.
Yeah, and scaring them off with demands that maybe
Yeah,
they can't achieve, maybe.
exactly. Yeah. And I find that so important. And I learned that through a couple of years of practicing because at first I was really excited and really the speech therapist who came in like, what are you doing? And wow, can I do that as well? But soon I realized that's actually scaring the children, my enthusiasm. So I learned over the years that actually silence is best at first so that the child feels that they are safe. This person, this stranger, really realizing about myself that actually I'm a stranger to them at first and becoming that safe adult in the space that over time they will start trusting because they will realize, like you said before, that all of the things that I'm doing are consistent and are not really threatening their inner emotional safety. So that's kind of the first thing that I really think about and really kind of accepting their presence and their interest and following that. And I find that they teach me so much more than I would ever teach them through that strategy.
I loved it when you said genuine interest. And I think it's really easy
Yeah,
to seem interested in it. A car rolling, or the wheels turning, but to have genuine interest in it and see what is the joy that they are getting out of that makes
yes,
such a difference. They can feel it. You can feel it. That is what connection is, isn't it? It's not falsehood. It's genuine interest in it, whether it's interested in ocean animals or interested in spinning or interested in I've got a child in my class that's fingers and we're really interested. What is it? Is it the fingers moving? Is it the physicality of it? Is it that they're seeing colours through the fingers? Is it counting? Is it songs in his head? Really interested so that we can also be genuinely interested and join his
yes.
joy in that. I feel like being genuine is the biggest part of being affirming and building that connection, isn't it?
I agree. And I love how you said that. It's all that goes in my mind. Exactly that. Like, why? Why is it interesting? And can I be interested in that in a genuine way? And really investigating a little bit, being a little detective as well in the background, whilst being silent and observing.
Yeah, so you are silent and probably quite still initially,
Yeah,
to not scare them
yeah.
off, but your head's probably working tenfold trying to work it all out.
It's so true. And I love how you mentioned that, staying a bit still, because I don't try to move my body too abruptly in the beginning, just to see what their sensory regulation is like. And really not to scare them off as well, but also not to trigger any past traumas or anything like that. And I think that's also a big part of making them feel safe because a lot of the time for children, we are these big humans with big bodies and they are so tiny And it can feel so condescending almost,
Mm.
that we're so big and so above them. So really sitting down on the floor, a bit further away from them, being at eye level or below, never above. So those are the little things that over time I kind of gotten used to doing, but I don't realize that they are little steps towards the connection. So it made me realize right now.
I think that's helpful for people to hear, though. We've got mainstream teachers, new teachers, parents, siblings listening to this
Yeah.
podcast. And I think this is the advice that people really need to hear is those, yeah, things that maybe you do naturally that you've learned over years to make yourself small, to be quite submissive in a way so that they can lead and feel in control of the interaction, I think is fantastic advice because we could have the best resources, the best toys, the best, all of these strategies. But if they're feeling out of control or scared and not safe, as you said, nothing's going to sit right. It's not going to feel neuroaffirming, is it? Even if you're saying the right things and using the right strategies, if you're towering over them, or even if you've got your arms crossed, or, you're very aware physically, actually, I feel, when
Mm,
you're in these, and especially the initial stages, but actually in all interactions, I feel very physically aware. I used to be a dancer, and I do wonder if that helps, actually. I've just realized that now because you're extra aware
yeah.
of where your body is in space and what your hands are doing and what your posture is. And I feel like it's almost like a dance, isn't it? Especially if we're talking about that initial interaction, that kind of intensive interaction way. It kind of is a to and fro conversation physically, isn't it? And if we're wanting them to feel in control and safe, well, then we need to be the smaller, quieter, stiller ones following their lead, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And oftentimes I feel like when I'm like very still and calm person in their presence, they start to be curious and they start to like looking into my direction, be like, who's this person and why are they there? And there we go. That's communication. And it just opens up without me doing anything. So it's just so magical to be a calm person and like near a small child.
Yeah. You might be the first adult that they've ever had enter their space and not put a
Mhm.
demand on them ever. Like, That's gonna
Yeah.
that's gonna set you up for intrigue at minimum, isn't it?
Uh,
It's definitely gonna help. It's not gonna hinder that connection building process. Do you often have other adults in the room with you, like other teachers or parents?
Yeah, I was just about to say that I'm almost never alone with a child. So there's always this in the back of my mind. It's not just about what I do, where I'm at in the room, but it's a lot about the environment as well, and how safe is the environment in terms of sensory stimuli, in terms of, are we all emotionally regulated in the space? Are there other children there? And are they emotionally regulated? What are their sensory needs? It's a huge dynamic process of trying
Do
to figure it all
you
out.
try and manage that, or are you just managing yourself? Do you try and move things out the way? Do you try and turn off the lights? Do you try and hush adults down? Like, how actively are you managing
Mhm.
everybody else in the space? I know you're not trying to control the child you're working with, but is there some scope to control everything else, or are you just focusing on yourself and you just being the safe space?
I think it depends on the type of team that I'm working with, but most of the time, yes, there are discussions around what does an environment that's communication friendly look like and what can we do to make it a safe space at all times, not just when, I try to create a new connection with a child. So definitely there is a lot of conversations happening. I wouldn't say that they are happening at the moment when I'm doing a session with a child, but they are happening before and after, whether that's through informal chats or through training or through some modeling and coaching. There's always that ongoing discussion about how an environment that's affirming looks like. And through those discussions that are ongoing, it then makes whatever sessions start in the classroom much easier and more easier really to be said.
Yeah, I suppose because you all have the same expectation, don't you? They might be panicking that nothing's happening, maybe, and
Yeah.
actually you're quite happy. So I suppose to come in with all the same expectation is helpful for everyone to know what success looks like is
Yes,
helpful.
exactly. Absolutely. So these conversations definitely happen they do, but I'm not in that session. So when I'm actually this quiet person that just gently entering a child's space, I wouldn't necessarily start talking to an adult near me because I'd hope that we had the chance to have that discussion beforehand. But if not, we can talk about it later. There's no problem in that. Or if the adult feels motivated to join, I would let
Right.
them to join. And maybe gently guide them, but not necessarily have a discussion with them about what we are
Why?
doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if there's lots of supporting adults listening to this, so what are some things that they could be doing to enable a safe space for when a child is working with a therapist or a teacher, maybe? Maybe they're not the lead adult. We've heard about what that can look like. What about the supporting adults in the room? What could they be doing to better enable this safe space that you're creating?
Yeah. So we do something called a learning walk together. Um, Oftentimes, and it kind of goes through a lot of interesting concepts about how a classroom and supporting adults should really look like and how it looks like. And I think the main thing is about their understanding of how to connect with a child in terms of, understanding what I'm doing. And then if they want to joining in with the same strategies. And if they don't have the capacity to join, promoting the calmer space around in the classroom. So, for example, if there is a dysregulated child, responding to that and, being with that dysregulated child so that the child that I'm trying to work with doesn't get dysregulated if they're maybe sensitive to loud
Yeah.
noises. Really, I think the key is being emotionally available, and really just noticing how children feel across the day and monitoring it and responding to it. And I think that's the biggest help, really.
Yeah, that's so true. And I feel like that is a big part of our job in school and parents as well, is constantly, you say, oh, I'm exhausted from today. I thought we haven't actually done anything. But what you're doing is constantly measuring emotional regulation and constantly risk assessing. And even if nothing awful is happening, everything's safe, you're always thinking of every eventuality, but this could happen, and then this and this and this and this and this. If that door opens, then this might happen, and then I'll do this. So you've done your day 100 times over in every eventuality, constantly to try and keep this safe and calm environment. And I feel like it's a big part of being available and working with these sensory learners, I suppose, is that trying to keep that regulation and calm throughout the day means that we are trying to read every situation.
Yeah, what worked really well previously was splitting the classroom into
Mm,
zones, like calming zone or interaction zone, exciting zone, movement zone, emotion zone, regulation zone. And each zone has like different sensory tools available. In each zone, there is an adult always present in that area. And over time, you start realizing that you're learning a lot about the profiles of the children in the classroom. Because, for example, maybe the active zone might be flooded with children and the calming zone is not, because everybody is a sensory seeker. And that tells you a lot about your classroom. And it also tells you a lot about what kind of strategies we can start working on next.
yeah. And what motivates them. We could use that, couldn't we, as a way in to build connection. If they're
That's it. Yeah.
seeking, jumping, running, wrestling, climbing, all of those kind of things, great, let's get them outside. Let's do some of that together. If they're seeking calming, they're liking ear defenders, weighted blankets, and being swaddled maybe, then maybe we can facilitate that. That's also a great start to building that connection, isn't it?
Yeah, I love that. And, I think a lot about special interests as well.
Mm.
And like having little dips of special interests across the classroom. And as teaching assistants, I feel like they often know more than I do about the special interests of the children in the classroom because, they work with them every single day. And they're such a good source of information for this. And they then know, oh, yes, this child likes this. And so putting it in the space and actually having it available. Because if they gravitate towards that, you can create communication opportunities through that type of interaction. So that's also a really good thing to do.
Yeah, so it's a great way of utilizing the team around the child, really, isn't it? Whether it's a parent or a
Yeah.
sporting adult, it's asking them ahead of time, like you said, when we're giving the training, also asking them about their expertise. Ultimately, they're the expert in the child, aren't they? They're the ones that spend the most time with them day in, day out. So they
Yeah.
know, what is what does heaven look like for them? What is their ideal
Yes.
scenario? What is their nightmare? What are their triggers? Yeah, what are their special interests? What could I bring? And it would be irresistible to them. They're all the kind of questions that I would be wanting to know, because otherwise we could work it out ourselves, but it might take us, 3, 4, 5 weeks to establish that. Whereas actually, if we know, we can kind of skip a few steps, can't we, of building connection?
Exactly, 100%. I feel like special interests are such a beautiful way to connect with a child, really. And it kind of loops back to the genuine interest, because if you really show interest in their special interests, whether it's a non-speaking child or a speaking child that communicates through different means. When you connect with them around their special interests, and actually, the next time you come into school, you start talking to them about it, or you bring something that is of their interest, you are nourishing that relationship in a genuine way. So I really like to learn about special interests of children I work with.
Yeah, I think it's one of the best bits of the job. I've learned so much about Minecraft and animals and trains, and
You become an expert.
so you've become an expert. And what a fantastic opportunity.
Yeah.
How lucky are we to be able to spend our days with experts in all these really interesting things, once you get down to it. It is
Yeah.
interesting. They are all interesting things. And also things like fans or hoovers or, whatever
Yes,
it
yes.
is, it can be, or shiny material or dropping things and making people laugh, whatever it is, throwing things, whatever it is that is their thing. It's got to
That's
be,
it.
there is something fun about it. Otherwise they wouldn't like it either. So it's us just finding the joy in what they're finding the joy in, isn't it?
Yeah. And oftentimes it doesn't just have to be, looking at something or doing something of their special interest, but it can also be incorporating it into the curriculum. And we don't need to do, numbers. We can do Play-Doh shapes in, like numbers, or we can just literally incorporate it into the curriculum, and it doesn't have to be learning and then a special interest. The special
Yes.
interest can actually be central of whatever we're trying to teach or whatever we're trying to do at
Yeah, I
home.
think that's imperative, actually. I think I mean, gosh, it is such a luxury of special education, isn't it? And that therapy practice that we
For sure,
we
yeah.
have the capacity to do that. We don't have 34 children in a class and one adult. We can facilitate that really bespoke and individualized sessions. And sometimes some of the best sessions aren't planned for. So yes, you can plan for a
Definitely.
session about around their special interest, but sometimes things
Uh,
just happen, and it's just us being open to that opportunity of, yeah, sometimes not forcing learning in there, but sometimes it just happens, and it's us grabbing those opportunities, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's not just grabbing them, but also actually realizing and noticing that they're
Mm.
there. Because I'm definitely, guilty of this. Like when I started working, I just didn't notice children were communicating with me and they were trying to tell me something. Like just for example, I would bring bubbles and I would expect, them to try to grab the bubbles or say they want more. But actually them just glancing at me or maybe moving a bit closer and then leaving, it's really still communication, realizing those subtle things that, yes, that is them trying to connect in their own way.
Yeah.
Um,
And also, if
yeah,
they move away or if they say no or push them away, that's also communication. That rejection, that
yeah,
protest and rejection
exactly.
is
Yeah,
something that I've only recently realized
yeah,
is really exciting. That's still a connection. That is still
yes.
them coming to you and feeling safe enough to protest and reject that.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah, exactly what you said. Feeling safe to say, no, Natalia, I'm not interested in you today. Goodbye.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. Like, yes, our session ended because I'm going to respect their no and their boundaries and try to plant a seed about consent. But, even though the session ended early, it's still a win for me because they said no. And that's huge. That
Yeah.
is confidence, right? That's roots
Yeah,
of
and you
confidence.
respecting that and honoring that no is only going to help develop that relationship and that trust even
Yeah,
stronger. Whereas if you ignore
exactly.
that and push through that, you're kind of losing and breaking that trust in a way, aren't you? That you've probably
Yeah.
worked weeks to build.
Yeah, yeah, and oftentimes the first few sessions might be, rejections because they don't know me, and that's okay. But if I'm, like you said, honoring that no multiple times in a row, the next time I show up, they might be like, all right, well, if I say no, this person will leave. So why don't I just try a little bit to see what they'll do if I drop this thing on the floor, right? And it's that feeling safe and starting to explore a bit more.
So where do you find the boundaries in that? Because we can't allow everything. It would
Yeah,
be, well, one, they like to know where the boundary is. That feels safe. Boundaries are safe. Structure is safe. Rules are safe. They keep us, we like to predict them. We like to know where we stand with all of that. So
100%. Yeah.
how do you navigate that? How can you make sure that the children are safe and they have clear boundaries and their predictable routine, whilst also being neuroaffirming and being led by them? How do you navigate that?
Yeah. So I think it really, again, starts with the team in terms of everybody being on the same page and agreeing what is the boundary. Because inconsistent messages can sometimes be really tricky to navigate, especially for autistic children that are not yet speaking or non-speaking, or autistic children that communicate in different ways and prefer and consistency. So really being on the same page is the first step. So having a good conversation going on in the team about what the boundary is in each situation. So what is the boundary about if a child is throwing something onto another child or a person? What is the boundary about trying to go out of the classroom? When is it okay and when is it not okay? And things like that. And once that is very, very clear, then for me it's very easy. And also for the teaching assistants and class teachers and all the other staff present, it's quite easy to then follow up on those boundaries because we all know in the space that that is our boundary and the children over time learn it as well. So, obviously if it's throwing something at another child, depending on their communication level, we would communicate that boundary, whether it's with a visual, whether it's with verbal words, whether it's with, talking to them through a story and just talking about safety in general if they're able to talk about that and just benchmarking it. Where are they at? What are they going to be able to kind of process, and really starting from that point and being consistent with enforcing the boundaries, because sometimes it might be hard if it's a busy classroom. So trying your best, it's never going to be perfect, but trying your best to really stick with that boundary. And I think the same really applies to home environment, and you can use a lot of strategies such like I said, visuals, stories, YouTube videos, all of those type of things. You can go into depth around boundaries. So no, it's not just about the adults knowing it, but it's also about the children and really scaffolding towards their understanding of communicating the
To
boundaries.
make it appropriate for wherever they're at. If they're working
Exactly.
developmentally at 6 months, it's going to look very different than if they're working
Yes.
developmentally at 6 or 7 age
Yeah.
stage, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. So for an example, if, developmentally they are operating at a 6-month level and they throw something at a child or at me, I would really just say single words or something very simple like, uh-oh, ow, and try to, redirect
Mhm.
at that stage.
Yeah, and then if they're age 6 or 7, maybe you do a social story
Yeah,
or a visual prompt or a verbal prompt, or
absolutely.
get them to go and pick it up and say sorry even, like
Yeah,
those kind of things, depending on
exactly.
where the child where the child is at. It has
Exactly.
to be appropriate for them. So when we're talking about consistency, it's consistency across the adults. It's not consistency across
Yeah,
all children. I think that's the difference,
exactly.
isn't it? That's the
Yeah.
difference between equity and equality.
Mhm.
Equality in the classroom would treat everybody the same. So nobody can throw in the classroom. Well, that doesn't work in a classroom like mine because I have students that are working at 0 months that their learning is actually to throw and drop an item. Like that is their
Yeah.
maths, is to learn to release. So it would be really wrong of me to have that consistent boundary across all children. Whereas I have
Yes.
children that that understand they can't throw in the classroom, and because of their sensory needs, they do. So, but they know where they should be throwing in they know they should
Yes.
be throwing outside or in the sensory room or whatever, and they know what they should be throwing. So it's very different across my learners. I'm consistent with each child individually with my adults. Well, I try to be. Obviously, none of we try to be, but what we don't mean is that we're a consistent classroom. We don't have the same
Yes.
expectations for all children necessarily, unless your children are randomly just all the same,
Yeah.
which I don't think I've worked with these classes for about 16 years now, and I have never had a class with all of the children with the same sensory profile, the same needs, same
It never
understanding, same
happens.
receptive, same expressive. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it
Working
is.
with these lovely children is the beauty of that. And I think you raised really interesting point that is, yes, the consistencies around the boundary agreement within the team, but not necessarily across children. And I've worked with a couple of throwers before, and sometimes what works well is also giving them a safe object to throw, right? And really honoring that fun that
Yeah,
they're having, but teaching them how to throw safely. Because there's nothing wrong with throwing. It's just that the consequence of it, if it's an object that can be unsafe,
yeah,
can be,
yeah. Yeah,
unsafe.
exactly. And I suppose it's also asking the question, is this the biggest thing to tackle right now as well? So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
being consistent, but if they are also incredibly dysregulated because it's photo day and it's raining and they've just been dropped off, so they've had a tricky transition and they haven't slept the night
that's it.
before,
Yeah.
they're feeling poorly and it's non-uniform day. I mean, these things happen. I'm not going to bring up also the throwing. I am going to ignore the throwing on this
Yes.
day and I'm going to manage the rest of the things. So, yes, it's being
Yeah.
consistent, but it's being flexible within that structure of consistency. And that's where it gets tricky, isn't it? That's where
Yeah.
years of experience come into play, where it's kind of a gut feeling. Yes, we know we shouldn't throw. Yes, this child knows we shouldn't throw. Yes, we know the rules. However, in this situation, it is the least of our worries. This is a
Yes.
minimal behavior in this situation. We're going to tackle the big thing in the room, which is that they feel unsafe and triggered because of this transition. If I tell them off and go through all the steps that we normally do for throwing, it's going to make it worse. It's going to make him more unsafe, more dysregulated. It's going to upset the room even more. In fact, it's going to throw even more and going to be even more unsafe.
Yeah.
So, what are we actually doing this for? Are we doing this to control him and make him compliant to the rules, or are we doing it to support him in this moment?
Yes. Exactly.
So that's a good question to ask yourself. Yes, it might look inconsistent. And often I get my staff saying, oh, I thought we were going to do. Yeah, yes, we were. Yes, we are. But in this
Yes.
moment, this child needs to know we are safe and we are understanding him and we are for him. He won't even remember that he's just thrown that. He is in a complete fog of dysregulation. Reasoning with him, we can't reason with him right now. This isn't the moment. This isn't the time. So it is having that concrete structure. It is having those consistent boundaries that everybody knows. But once they are set and once everybody does know it, it's having that then flexibility. And I think that's what makes it neuroaffirming. That's the difference, isn't it?
Yes. It's that
Between
flexibility.
that ability to
Yeah.
be flexible and to just be constantly asking yourself as a bit of a mantra, what would be the most supportive thing for this child in this moment right now? Sometimes it is to keep to the boundary and the structure because that's almost what they're asking us to do. They want to know that that is the boundary and they feel safe and secure in that. Other times, like I've just described, it isn't. And actually, that isn't helpful in that moment. And I know that can be really, really confusing. And you
It
have
is.
just got to feel it. And it's different for every child in every moment. But that's how I navigate it is I just ask myself, what is the what is the child needing the most right
The
now?
child's backstory.
Yeah, what are the
Yeah.
routes of the day? A bit like an iceberg analogy. We just see the iceberg, we just see the throwing and the dysregulation, but all that ice is under the water, all that stuff of illness and dysregulation. Maybe mum was a bit moany this morning, and maybe they didn't have their breakfast, and maybe they didn't, all those things that they're coming in with. That's the real thing that we need to tackle right now. It isn't actually the throwing. The throwing is just an aftermath of the actual real thing that's going on.
Yes, sometimes it is, absolutely. And I think that kind of nicely ties into the social story as well, because
Mm.
the purpose of the social story is not going to be compliance with the rules. And we're not going to be using sentences like, I will have calm hands and not throw things. It's just going to be about really self-advocacy and trying to understand, how I feel when I want to throw and why I throw and what I can throw and what's not super safe to throw and how to ask for help with throwing.
I love
And
that. Do you know what? That's something that we don't do very well. We've just started using social stories with them. I've used them in the past, but we've just started using social stories in my class. We've just recently got a pupil that was able to access those. We haven't had that for a while. And
nice.
actually, you're right. We have gone down accidentally down the control and compliance route. We're talking about inside voices. We're talking about safe hands. We're talking about respecting our friends. We're talking about being safe. And you're so right. Actually, what is more helpful to her would be feel like my ears ring when it is loud. I don't know, like
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
something
can
like
find
that.
an adult or I can go and get my ear defenders when I'm feeling, yeah. So
Yeah,
that is, I'm going to rewrite them because that is so crucial and a really great reminder of being affirming not only in what we're doing, but also what we're writing, what we're giving the children. Our messaging is really important, and that's something we aren't doing very well actually. So we can improve that. So thank you for that.
for sure. And I think also kind of realizing that maybe social stories can be accessible to non-speaking children
Mm.
as well. You can make them really simple. It can be simple photos or symbols if they can access symbols. So for example, we have been preparing a child for a transition about actually a small transition, a new classmate, and this child is non-speaking, but we've made a very simple two-page social story about, my name is, and these are my classmates, and there is a new picture. And we are like, and that's it. We're just recognizing that
Yeah.
there is a change, and let's regulate about that change together
It
in
prepares
beforehand.
them. Moving house, I've used them for. Transitions are really great, actually. Social stories are fantastic for transitions.
Excellent.
Transitioning
Yeah.
of, I don't know, starting periods, moving house, change in, it's a fire alarm. So, preparing them for an eventual situation or event is they're really, really great. And yeah, I've used them with quite, high needs, minimally speaking children as well. And yeah, have had really good success. And also it doesn't hurt. Even if they can't receive that information, it is helpful. I've also done it through sensory stories and play as well. So we were going to the trampoline park, for example, and I was really panicked that they had to wear these stupid sticky socks. Do you know the ones? For these trampoline, and I thought, this is going to be a huge barrier for us enjoying this trampoline park. They're going to love the trampoline park, but if they don't wear the socks, that we aren't allowed to come in. And I was really anxious, actually, stemming from my anxiety, that this is going to be a huge barrier for them. So we're going to practice wearing socks. So what we did is every day for the week leading up, we practiced wearing our socks, and then we jumped on the little trampette in my class. So they would learn, if I want to jump, I have to wear the socks. So that when we went to the trip
Right.
and
Yeah.
we show them the socks, they would have seen it. They'd have felt it. They'd have know that we have to put it on. They know that we have to put it on in order to bounce. That concept would make sense to them. And these are, like I said, very high needs children, some working at 6 months, and yet it helped them because they'd already felt the socks. They weren't brand new. And also, we'd worn the socks in a little bit. They got used to the smell, the feeling, all of that. That's a social story. It doesn't have to
Yes,
be
exactly.
written.
Yeah, exactly. I want to say that. Amazing. Yeah, because a lot of times, when we do, like, you've mentioned it before, definitely like sensory stories. You can do social stories the way you do sensory stories, exactly what you described. And you can share a message without like a book. So that's such a powerful way to really allow them to experience everything beforehand and decide whether they like it or not, and whether they feel safe in it or not. And actually, it's a very powerful example you gave, because they were able to try something new in a known environment, in a safe
Yes.
environment. That's really a powerful strategy that you're using there
I've
for
got some
learning.
coming out next year, actually. This year, all my social story, as all my sensory stories coming out are all to do with my curriculum. Next
Yeah.
year, they're all to do with social stories. So we've got bath time, haircuts, dentists, hospital visits, all of those terrifying things that parents think, how are we going to get them there?
Yeah.
I'm hoping that, yeah, through
Yes.
sensory stories, they can have already experienced all of the things that they're going to feel and hear and smell and experience too. So it's not as much of a shock when they actually do the thing, is my hope.
Yes.
So they're coming
Yeah.
next year. Don't, you're going to nag me for them now, but yeah, they're coming next year because I think it's really
Yeah.
important to have accessible social stories for high needs people, not just children, but all
Yeah.
people.
It reminds me of a conversation I just had recently with a parent who really wanted to take her child on a holiday. And she was like, but I'm so worried about the whole sensory aspect of it. How is it gonna go? So we explored trying on the headphones and going to the the Museum of Transport to go and sit in a plane, because there is a model plane you can sit in, and
Fantastic.
trying to touching it from the outside, from the inside. So really trying to use the environment, whatever you've got available, um, to prepare your
Mm.
sensory system for that input,
One thing at a
really.
time rather than it all at once.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
when there's a deadline, there's not a deadline if you do it beforehand. We could wait 20 minutes for children to put on their sticky socks when we were in our safe environment.
Yeah.
But when you're, yeah, when you're on the holiday, there's deadlines, there's timelines. You can't have dysregulation and freeze
Yes.
mode for 2 hours in the airport whilst you're trying to regulate yourself again because you've got a plane to catch. That's stressful, isn't
Yes.
it? So do those things beforehand. So at one at a time and get used to it is yeah, really wonderful advice. And actually this podcast is coming out in June, I believe. So people will be preparing for and thinking about their upcoming holidays or even a trip to the beach, a trip to the park, a trip to Nan and Granddad's new house, whatever it is that you're planning on doing. Maybe have an experiment with this. Maybe if it's a written story or a photo story or
Yeah.
even a sensory story about what is that experience for them? What are the steps that we're going to have to go to from their safety in the home all the way to achieving this thing and then back again? What does that look like? What does that smell like? What does that feel like to them? And then, yeah,
Yeah.
practicing that and reading that through that, I hope that it would, well, it's not going to hurt, but I hope that it would
Yeah.
make it a really positive
Yeah.
and more accessible experience because they feel like they've already done it.
And I think what I want to highlight here is that we're not trying to achieve sensory desensitization. We're
Mm,
just trying
yes.
to achieve kind of trying out the accommodations that are available. So, for example, the plane example, we were trying out the feeling of the headphones that will block out the sounds, because we know this child was sound sensitive. And then obviously trying to see how the plane looks like, so that it's obviously not a shock for the first time, because that was for them to go for the first time. But what we weren't doing is that we were not exposing the child to loud noises so that they're okay with it on the flight day.
Yeah, that's so important to say. We are preparing them for what's happening. We're not desensitizing them because
Yeah,
that isn't neuroaffirming, is it? That
exactly.
that pushing through masking. We're not asking them to mask their needs. We're just helping them know what is going to happen so they can be better prepared for it. I think that's the difference, isn't it?
Yes, that's the difference for sure.
Amazing. On that note, that's going to be my homework. I'm going to rewrite my social stories. Thank you for that.
Yay!
That's brilliant.
That's amazing to
I love
hear.
using these as homework. I often give myself homework in these podcasts. So that'll be mine for this week is having a think about my social stories and my messaging to my children and making sure that's just as affirming as everything else we do. I think we could do a better job than that. So thank you so much, Natalia.
Amazing.
Um, you've got a new website, haven't you? Do you want to share
Yeah,
about that?
I've been building my new website lately, and I just finally launched it. I'm such a huge perfectionist. Honestly, I need to let go of that. It was great fun building it. So, yeah, it's at www.speechesteem.com. So if anybody's interested in working with me, they can have a look to see. I work with children who are autistic, but also I'm able to support children who have developmental language disorder, language delays, little ones that might not yet be so confident in using communication and supporting through emotional regulation as well. So, really excited to see what it brings.
Amazing. And if you're not local to London, then definitely also check out Natalia's social media as well, which have got loads of information in there. And it's at Speech Esteem, isn't it?
Speech
At
esteem, yes,
Speech Esteem on social
that's it.
media. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute joy, and I personally have gotten a lot out of it. So I hope that everybody listening has as well.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great fun.